Okay, next thing I want to talk about is the final assumption related to this. So let's look at our progress. We've gone through the first two items, Daniel 8 relation to Daniel 9 and how that establishes 457 BC. I've talked through 2,300 days extensively, and day for year, and the idea of the weeks prophecy in Daniel 9, as what's interpreted as weeks. Now I'm going to look at the last aspect here. So Daniel 8 referencing Yom Kippur in heaven. Okay, so a couple things associated with this. First, we are going to look at the work in the Jesus' work in the most holy place, the term of the most holy place, and how that associates with all this. And we'll take a look at Hebrews 9 and how Hebrews 9 is interpreted, what it means. A lot of people get wrapped around the axle of the term most holy place, and whether or not Jesus went into the most holy place or into the holy place. And then we'll talk about investigative judgment. And I'm interested in anybody that has any biblical reference for justifying an investigative judgment teaching anywhere. Any biblical reference that even implies that Yom Kippur has anything whatsoever to do with an investigative judgment. 100% interested in that. And then talk a little bit about the Day of Atonement and whether the word Kippur, which is atonement, whether that's the same word as we see in Daniel 8. And if not, why? If that's what that is supposed to mean. Okay? Okay, now let's dive into the discussion of what would have happened if Jesus was to enter the Day of Atonement. What does that mean? When did that occur if he did? We've already talked about the beginning time of 457 BC. I don't believe that that's related to Daniel 8. Regardless, we've talked about the 2,300 evenings and mornings or days. Whether that should be translated as years, I don't believe it should. But regardless, now let's talk about what would have happened, or what. Let's take that aside and assume that those two are true, and talk about the final aspect, which is Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and the investigative judgment. Okay, let's have that conversation now. I believe that this is really well summarized in the book of Hebrews, and there's been a lot of confusion around this, so I'm going to take a little bit of a deviation. Some of the people that have had trouble with this particular passage and what it means have made a technical term out of the most holy place, as if that was the most holy was a technical term used by the Hebrew writers, the Jews, when they were talking about a specific compartment within the sanctuary. It's true that that term was used in connection with the sanctuary, especially when it was being built, but you would be surprised how few times it actually was used in connection with the temple, or at least with the room itself. For example, the term is used 41 times in the Old Testament, most holy. In Hebrew, Kodesh, Kodeshim. Literally, if we were to translate that, it would sound something more like that which is set aside from all those things that are set aside. So the Kodeshim modifies holy, the Kodesh, and says this is set aside from all the stuff that's already set aside. That's all holy means, set aside. Okay, so the most holy then really just means that which is set aside from the already set aside part. For example, a tithe being presented by the priests, because the tithe that they would have received would have been from the people, then their tithe to the high priest, that would have been an example of that. Okay, I don't think that word's actually used in connection with that, but of the 41 times that term is used, about 10 of them are actually related to the room. Most of them are associated with the sacrifices, the work of the priests, other stuff like that. It's not a technical term. In fact, to get even more drastic in the statement, the Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16, the passage that refers to Yom Kippur, that passage does not use the term Kodesh Kodeshim. It only says Kodesh. Right? It talks about going behind the veil and that the priest should only go behind the veil once a year, and here's how he should do it. That passage in Leviticus 16 does not use the Kodesh Kodeshim. So, okay, so let's take a look at this passage specifically. This is Leviticus 16. This is the Yom Kippur introduction. This is how it works. And the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron. Remember that Nadab and Abihu had gone behind the veil and were killed. So after the sons of Moses, when they offered before the Lord and died, and the Lord said unto Moses, Speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place. That obviously is referring to behind the veil, a holy place. He's not talking about the most holy. He's talking about, there is no technical term here. He's talking about the most inside room of the sanctuary, but he's calling it the holy place here. Okay, because the regular priests went in the room where the showbread and the candlesticks were, they did that every day. This is referring to the most inside room. Okay, they not come in at all times within the veil, the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat. So that's clearly a reference to the most holy place. But as you can see from the passage, if we use the Bible and let the Bible talk for itself, this most holy place is not a technical term. They don't use that term. All right, which is upon the ark, that he die not. For I appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. Thus shall Aaron come into the holy place. The holy place, again, not even referencing the veil, okay? With a young bullock for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. And he shall put on holy linen coat, and he shall have linen breeches upon his flesh, and he shall be girded with linen girdle, and the linen mitre shall be attired. These are the holy garments, therefore they shall wash in fresh water, and so put them on, and shall take of the congregation of children 2 kids of the goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Okay, so part of the reason I wanted to read this is so that you remember which sacrifices are related to this, because they are going to be referenced in the book of Hebrews. Okay, so here we are, the bullock and the ram and the goats. Okay, these are specific offerings that are related to the Yom Kippur. Okay, that's probably enough of that. It's in Leviticus 19. You're welcome to go read it. Okay, so please feel free. Now let's skip over to Hebrews chapter 9. Now, like I said, a lot of people get wrapped up around the idea that this doesn't say most holy place is where Jesus went when he ascended, but there's plenty of clues in the passage, and we're going to read this. We're going to read a lot of it. And I think that it's important, no matter what translation you choose and you believe is the most favored translation, don't pick at the words, pick at the meaning of the passage. What does it mean in its whole? We're going to look at that. Incidentally, for all those out there that are really wrapped around the axle about Kodesh Kodeshim and this in the chapter here in Hebrews, I want you to remember that in the passage in Daniel 8:14, it says only Kodesh. There's no Kodesh Kodeshim there. So if you think that this doesn't mean most holy place because it doesn't have Hagion in Greek, then clearly you are willing to accept that Daniel 8:14 is not referring to the most holy place, because it doesn't say it either. All right. So let's read what we have here in Hebrews 9. I'm debating whether I should show you. Yeah, why not? Let's flip over real quick. I'll show you that Daniel doesn't have. I would like to make sure that we're clear and above board and everything here. So let's flip over here. Daniel 8:14. Here's the word Kodesh. That's what it looks like. All right. There is no Kodesh Kodeshim. It's not there. Refers to the sanctuary, really just means holy. It's okay. But that's the word. There is no word after it saying most holy. Okay, so Daniel 8:14, there's the beginning of 14, and this is the part we talked about, Erev Boker, Elefim Veshalosh Ma'ot. Okay, and we haven't talked yet about this word that says to be cleansed, which is a completely different discussion. This word is not kippur, which is to make atonement for. This word is to make right. The need tzedak is, so tzedakah means righteousness. In the back of every synagogue ever, you'll see a little blue block. It has tzedakah written on the back. It means righteousness. It's for donations. This word is from the same root. From the same root that means righteous. It does not mean to make atonement for. It's not the same word. A kippur is the word for making atonement. So, not number one. This doesn't have most holy place, which doesn't mean anything, as I've just proved. It's not a technical term anyway. That could have been most holy place or the sanctuary. Number two, though, it does not say kippur. It says nin tzedek, which is to make right, or to. It's from the same word, the root that means righteous. Okay. Anyway, didn't mean to take that deviation. Sorry about that. So here we go. Let's look at Hebrews 9. Okay. Then verily, the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle made, and the first wherein was a candlestick, and a table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all. Now, this is a term that they're using to distinguish clearly between the two. And they did the same thing in the Old Testament. When the sanctuary was set up, that's when the sanctuary was set up in the book of Exodus and in the book of Kings, and I think the other one was Chronicles. When those are set up, when the sanctuaries were set up, that's when we found the Kodesh Kodeshim referencing a specific room. When they're making a distinction, oh, by the way, this is the most holy, that's when they made that distinction. But otherwise, it's not used that way, okay? So yes, it is used here. He's making a distinction. This is a very Hebrew-esque way of writing this. It's perfectly fine. Don't get wrapped up on this, okay? Verse 4. Which had a golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant, and over it the cherubim of glory shadowing, and the mercy seat, of which we cannot speak particularly. Now these things were thus ordained. The priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. But into the second went the high priest alone, once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. The Holy Ghost is signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertained to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks, and diverse washings, and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of the Reformation. But Christ, being come a high priest, why is it high priest distinct? Why do we bother to use these words? If we read back here in verse 6, the high priest went once. Only the high priest went once. Okay, so we're making a reference to the high priest in verse 11. The high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats or calves. Remember the list of sacrifices that occurred in Leviticus 16? Not by his own, but by his own blood, he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us all. Having entered once into the holy place. Okay, so we just read above. In verse 7 that in verse 6 and 7 that the priests, the regular priests, went into the first part regularly, but once a year the high priest went into the most holy place. Okay, now the thing that wraps up a lot of people here is that this said that he went into the holy place. So here we go. Anyway, for if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctified and purified the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purging your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Okay, the heifer that's referenced there is what's called the red heifer ceremony. There's a long passage on it. I could find it at some point if you're interested. But this was how the sanctuary was actually cleansed. This is how it was. This was the initial inauguration of the sanctuary. This is what they did. In this passage, there's actually a difference of views, at least two that I've found so far, between various Adventist speakers. One believes that there's no way Jesus went into the most holy place at all, because that says holy place, not most holy place. Okay, well, that's not really understanding the use of the words. The other view says, yes, he went in, but it was just like Moses, when Moses went in to purify the place and consecrate it with the red heifer exercise, which is what this makes reference to. Okay. And just so you know that there's some competing views. Not a lot of people actually agree on this because it. All right. Continuing in verse 15. So, and for this cause, he is the mediator for the New Testament, and by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first testament, they which are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance. For the testament is, there must be a necessity of death of the testator. The testament, let's skip down here. So, verse 19. For when Moses spoke every precept to the people according to the law, he took the blood of the calves and the goats, and the water of the scarlet wool and the hyssop, and sprinkled it on the book and on the people. And this is the passage I said. This is the red heifer exercise. This is why some people think that's what happened here. Saying, this blood of the testament which God hath enjoined on you, moreover, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and the vessels of the ministry, and almost all things are by law purified with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no remission. Okay, so that's the part that they read and understand that way. That's fine. It was therefore necessary that this pattern of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but that the heavenly things themselves with a better sacrifice than these. For Christ has not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the priest entered into the holy place every year. Okay, when did the priest enter in the holy place every year? Only on Yom Kippur. And here it's using holy place and specifically is referring to Yom Kippur. Here it's saying, this is a really important passage. If you miss this, you're going to miss the whole section of Hebrews here. He's talking about Yom Kippur because he says this happens once per year, and he's talking about the high priest. Okay, let's read this again. Nor yet should he offer himself often, as the high priest entered into the holy place, most holy place if you want to use the technical term, every year with the blood of others, for then he must have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now, once in the end of the world, he has appeared to put away sin and sacrifice of himself, by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed unto men to die once, and after that the judgment. So Christ was once offered to bear the sins for many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear a second time without sin and unto salvation. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's look in verse 10, or chapter 10, because this passage is actually long and it's not really finished yet. Okay. For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices that were offered year after year, continually make the comers thereunto perfect. For they would not have ceased, to be offered, because the worshippers, once purged, should have had no conscience of sin. But in these sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. Again, we're talking about every year, what occurred every year in the seventh month. This is another reference to Yom Kippur. And it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sin. What is that referring to? It's not referring to the sin offerings, because you have no specific need to offer a sin offering unless you commit sin. This is referring to Yom Kippur, which happened every year no matter what you did. That's the point of the passage, is it happens every year. Therefore, when he cometh into the world, he says, sacrifice and offerings you wouldst not, but a body thou hast prepared. In burnt offerings and sacrifices and sin thou hast no pleasure. For then said I, lo, I have come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God. Above, when he said, sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offerings for sin thou wouldst not, neither hast pleasure therein, which are offered by law. Then saith, lo, I have come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, and he may establish the second. By the which we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Okay. By all means, read this passage. And if you read this passage and you think that he's referring to that he's not saying that Jesus went into the most holy place when he ascended, that's okay. All these are past tense. Everything he's saying here is past tense. So let me offer another piece of evidence for you. This is from Matthew 27. Let's start in verse 50, okay? It says, Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to bottom. And the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Okay. I think that the meaning that we're to understand from all this, that it's easy to miss. What's being shown here is that when Jesus died, he became the Yom Kippur sacrifice. And at that moment, what Hebrews is saying is the path is now open into the most holy place. There is no waiting 1,000 some years for this to occur. It happened then. The veil was rent, the pathway was open. To make this something that it's not is a forced interpretation, I think. I think that we're missing the passage here that really is important. You know what Hebrews is really saying here? This is what Hebrews is saying. When he talks about the first being done away with in favor of the second, in all the digging around the words and trying to make them mean what we wanted to mean, you missed the point. The point of this is that Jesus, in what he's done in our lives, he's made it possible that now the second Moses, instead of providing a law outside, he's now providing the law inside. This is the passage, he's referencing the fulfillment of the passage that he'll write law in the hearts. That's the point here. You cannot be without a conscience of sin if you continue to sin. So, what Hebrews is talking about is purifying the worshipers from sin. That's the point. He's not saying that this is a new way that you can sin and God takes care of it. No, that's not the point. The point is that he's saying you will not sin anymore. He's removing sin from your life. And that is done through the writing the promise of writing the law on your heart. So in picking this apart and trying to make it say something it doesn't, it completely destroys the power, the very point of the sacrifice and what Jesus has done and made available to everybody to destroy the power of sin and death and to make us able to be perfect in his sight. So that's so Yom Kippur isn't even the word used in the passage in Daniel 8. The passage in Hebrews, I think, is very clear that Jesus entered the most holy place and started the work of Yom Kippur, the atypical day of Yom Kippur. At his ascension, that's what he did. He, as part of the sacrifice, the veil was torn. All that occurred in the first century, not 1844. I think that's clear. Now, I've got one more question related to this section, and I'm just going to throw this out because this is one that I don't even know what to do with. I'm kind of lost in this one. Investigative judgment. What? There is no investigative judgment in the Bible anywhere that I found. Now, if you have a reference for any investigative judgment that occurs as part of Yom Kippur or something, by all means, please message me and let me know, because it doesn't exist. It's nowhere. This is literally not a thing. And the idea that at any moment God's going to judge your life and that's it, that completely removes the entire concept of what salvation is. That is a false teaching that undermines the assurity of salvation, which is the very point of 1 John, where God gave his people the assurity that he was going to complete the work that he started. When we make this judgment call and we act like it's based on our works, that we're going to have to solve all this in ourselves and make ourselves perfect, we completely miss the passage of Hebrews, which just said that God's going to write his law in our heart. Then we will be perfect because our law will be part of who we are. He will make, instead of having the outward action of rites and rituals, it'll become a part of who we are. Instead of the outside trying to change the inside, it'll be the inside which changes the outside. So that's an insidious doctrine. I'm very concerned about that application of what it means to salvation by faith. And to be honest with you, this is not how I came at this originally. This is something that Desmond Ford found, and that's what his frustration was with it. I came at it from a technical point of view, going through all the stuff we've just gone through. He came at it from the other side. This is how he got here first. And I think he's right. I think that this is a bad teaching because beyond the point of it not being biblical, look what it does to salvation by faith. Look what it does to us saying, God has saved us. He will do the work in us that he has promised to do. No, that's not what it says. It says we have to keep ourselves perfect because at any second, God's going to move from judging the dead to the living, and then your time's up, and that's it. If you're great, your probation's closed. That's it, over, and done. That's not even a biblical teaching. That's not a thing. This investigative judgment is fabricated. So I challenge you to show me otherwise. I'm willing to, and I will absolutely put out a retraction if there is anybody that can show any example. And I mean an example outside of somebody saying, well, because he brings his reward with him, so he must have done a judgment. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the last section. We're almost done here.